Have you ever noticed how hard people work to accumulate stuff, money, possessions, titles, and then still feel like it's never enough? From ancient parables to modern politics, it seems like we've always struggled to answer the same question. What actually makes life meaningful? Welcome to Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be taking a look at 3 readings from the Christian Bible through the lens of sacred myth. As we reflect on the readings for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we'll explore how human beings have always wrestled with greed, status, and tribal division, and how generosity, connection, and shared values might be the antidote we've been looking for. In this episode, we're asking something simple but rather bold. What if the real wealth in life isn't something you can hoard, but something you create by giving freely and showing up for others? Because if we want a just and thriving society, it won't come from bigger barns or more billionaires. It will come from each of us deciding to live like people matter more than possessions. So grab a comfy seat, a glass of your favorite beverage, and let's look at some ancient stories together in this edition of Mythologizing the Bible, where we'll be exploring the readings for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. In this series, we're exploring readings from the Bible through the lens of sacred myth, looking for interpretations and lessons that don't demand a belief in the supernatural. And what that means from a practical standpoint is that we will assume that these stories and writings are fiction, written by pre-scientific people with their own agendas and different audiences. Now, you might agree with the lessons I find, but I encourage you to look for something that rings true to you. Part of the beauty of understanding these writings as sacred myths is that we're free to interpret them for ourselves. We're free to learn the lessons that we need right now. So with that, let's dive in. As I said, tonight we'll be looking at the readings for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C. Our first reading is from Ecclesiastes. It's chapter 1, verse 2, and chapter 2, verses 21 through 23. Our second reading is from Colossians. It's chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, and verses 9 through 11. And our gospel reading is from Luke. It's chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Now, we'll start by going through all 3 of the readings, then we'll look for the messages in the main lesson in each one. Finally, we'll bring everything together, look at what it means for us today, and talk about where we go from here. And with that, let's begin. Our first reading is from the book of Ecclesiastes. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. Our second reading is from Paul's letter to the Colossians. Brothers and sisters, since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge in the image of its Creator. Here there is no Gentile or Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, slave or free, but Christ is all and is in all. And our gospel reading is from Luke. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." All right, so let's go back now and take a critical look at these readings and see what learnings and lessons we can find if we dig around just a little bit. So our first reading was from the book of Ecclesiastes, and the writer of Ecclesiastes doesn't hold back. Meaningless, meaningless. That's how he kicks things off. And honestly, it's kind of hard to argue with him. He's talking about a man who spends his life working hard, putting in the effort, using wisdom and skill to build something, only to die and leave it all behind for someone who didn't lift a finger and likely doesn't even appreciate the work he did. Sound familiar? It's the age-old question. What's the point of grinding yourself into dust if everything you've built is just going to be inherited, potentially wasted by someone else? It's a brutal truth that I think still resonates today, especially when we look at our modern obsession with success, status, and stuff. This reading sort of strikes a blow at the illusion that our possessions define our value. And think about it. We live in a world where billionaires hoard unimaginable wealth, while entire communities struggle to meet basic needs. And somehow, our culture still idolizes the rich, as if owning more things makes someone better. Even people who don't have much often fall into the trap of believing that accumulating more is the meaning of life. But this reading calls that out for what it is. It's empty. Chasing after things won't satisfy us. And deep down, most of us know that. We just don't like to admit it. Sometimes we don't like to admit it because we have no idea what to focus on instead. What people need to realize is that what really matters the most can't be bought. Connection, love, community, even a sense of purpose. You can't put a price tag on the moment a friend shows up when you need him, or when you feel heard and seen and truly valued, not for what you do or what you have, but for who you are. That's the kind of wealth this reading points toward, even if it's a bit indirect. The wisdom here isn't just in giving up the pursuit of things. It's in choosing instead to invest in what lasts. Not the stuff that fills our garages and basements and storage units, but the relationships and the experiences that fill our lives with meaning. So the main lesson I got from our first reading is that the best things in life aren't things. This passage might seem a little bleak at first glance, but it's actually offering something rather powerful, a way out of the rat race. If we can stop measuring our worth by what we own and start valuing who we are to each other, then maybe we'll finally stop chasing more and we'll start living better. Because at the end of our days, it's not our stuff that will matter. It's our story. And it's the people in it. Because the best things in life aren't things. Our second reading was from Paul's letter to the Colossians. And in this reading, it feels surprisingly current. What he's talking about here. Paul's telling the community to let go of some pretty universal vices. Things like greed, lust, deception, cruelty. He was telling them to embrace a better way of living. And while his reasoning is rooted in Christian theology, the advice itself mirrors what ancient Greco-Roman philosophers were saying. And they were saying it even at that time. If we want to live well, we need to live with integrity, discipline, and compassion. We don't have to buy into the metaphysics of baptism or things above to recognize that this is solid. It's a solid, timeless message. We do these things not because of divine command, but because they make us better human beings. And they help us to create better communities. Now, the second half of this passage moves into, I guess, some even deeper territory. Paul calls out the old social labels: Jew, Gentile, slave and free, barbarian and civilized, and he says it's time to leave that all behind. And that's huge. He's telling them to stop defining themselves by race, culture, religion, class, or social status, and to start seeing each other as equals. Now, again, we don't need to agree with his theological rationale to appreciate the point. In a world that keeps trying to pit us against each other, red versus blue, citizen versus immigrant, wealthy versus working class, this message is still revolutionary. We can't move forward if we're stuck dividing people into us and them. Our real progress begins when we focus on shared values, not on inherited identities. And here's something that probably made the religious leaders of Paul's day squirm a bit. Paul implies that people can connect with God and with goodness without relying on the priests, the rituals, or the hierarchy. That was a bold claim back then, and it still is today. Now, for those of us who've stepped away from organized religion, well, this part is worth thinking about. You don't need a pulpit or a collar to know what's right. You don't need ancient creeds or divine authority to build a meaningful life. You need values that hold up, right? Values that stand on their own merit. You need relationships that matter. And you need the courage to live what you believe, especially when it brings people together rather than pushing them apart. So the main lesson I got from our second reading is that we should set aside differences and focus on shared values. We can set aside the supernatural framing that Paul used, but still embrace the heart of the message. We're better off when we stop obsessing over our differences and start building bridges around shared values. Values like justice, compassion, honesty, dignity, forgiveness. Not because a religious figure said so, but because it makes us more human. We should set aside differences and focus on shared values. Okay, our final reading was from the Gospel of Luke. And this reading starts with a pretty relatable scene. Someone wants help settling a family dispute over inheritance. Not exactly a rare problem, right? Back then, rabbis were often asked to weigh in on certain legal and financial matters. But Jesus didn't take the bait. Instead of getting involved in the specifics, he turns the conversation into a teaching moment about greed. And then follows it up with a parable about a man who hits the jackpot, builds bigger barns to hoard it all, and then promptly dies. Not exactly a happily ever after fairy tale ending. But the point is loud and clear. Wealth doesn't mean much if it doesn't benefit anyone but yourself, because you can't take it with you when you go. Now, the parable of the rich fool hits harder when we really spend some time with it. This guy had a record-breaking harvest. He had more than enough, probably more than anyone in his village had seen in years. But instead of asking how he could help others, he built bigger barns. His plan was to eat, drink, and be merry, alone. Not a single mention of sharing. Not a thought at all about community. And when he died, all that abundance just sat there. It certainly didn't help him, because he was dead. But look, it's not the wealth itself that made him foolish. That's an important point. It's not the wealth itself that made him foolish. It's what he did or didn't do with it. And that's a warning we still need today. Now, let's be honest. We live in a world that rewards hoarding. Whether it's billionaires stockpiling fortunes or everyday folks with closets full of things they'll never use, our culture often confuses success with accumulation. But what if we could change that? What if success was measured by how many people we helped, not by how many things we owned? You don't have to believe in a deity to see the wisdom here. Whether we call it being rich toward God or simply being a decent human being, the message is the same. If you have more than you need, give. Invest in people. Share some of your surplus. That's what turns wealth into something meaningful and keeps you from becoming a rich fool. So the main lesson I got from our gospel reading is that we should be generous, especially with our excess. Let's face it, no one gets remembered fondly for the size of their barn. But people do remember kindness. They remember generosity. They remember who showed up, who helped, who gave without being asked. So whether you're flush with money, time, talent, or resources, whatever it is, don't just stash it away. Use it. Share it. Make it count. We should be generous, especially with our excess. All right, let's review the lessons we've talked about so far. In our first reading from Ecclesiastes, the main lesson I came away with was the best things in life aren't things. In our second reading from Colossians, the main lesson I got was we should set aside differences and focus on shared values. And finally, the main lesson I got from our gospel reading was we should be generous, especially with our excess. What if the real wealth in life isn't something you can stash in a vault or show off at a cocktail party? What if real wealth is something you build by showing up for others, over and over and over again. This week's readings help us imagine a better way to live. Not one driven by greed or tribalism or ego, but one that's grounded in generosity and shared values. We're reminded that our differences don't have to divide us, especially when we're committed to things like justice, compassion, and dignity. And the truth is, when we stop hoarding, whether it's wealth, time, or influence, when we stop hoarding and start sharing what we have, we all come out ahead. Not just materially, but emotionally, spiritually, and definitely socially. A just and thriving society isn't built on personal accumulation. It's built on connection. And that starts with choosing to be generous and choosing to care. So let's step back and take another look at these readings overall, and we'll see if we can figure out what these lessons really mean to us in our daily lives. To do this, I'll try to answer two questions. So what? And now what? Okay, so what? Why should we care about any of this? Well, we should care about this because greed divides us. And it's doing exactly what the ultra-wealthy want it to do. If we're busy arguing about who deserves to be here, who's legal, who's stealing jobs, and who gets access to basic rights and dignity, we're not paying attention to the real hoarders. The folks at the tippy top have spent decades rigging the system so they can keep getting richer while we fight over the crumbs. If we don't question those labels, if we keep believing the lie that generosity makes us weaker, we're just doing their work for them. We should care about this because labels kill empathy. When we call someone an illegal immigrant, we erase the human being behind the story. A person trying to provide for their family becomes a threat instead of a neighbor. And once we've slapped that label on someone, we stop trying to connect. We stop trying to understand. We stop looking for shared values. It's easier to ignore someone or even justify harming them if you've decided they're not like you. But the truth is, they're probably more like you than you'll ever know because you've labeled them and dismissed them. We should care about this because generosity isn't just a virtue. It's a weapon against division. When we share what we have, our time, our attention, our resources, we build relationships. We create trust. We strengthen communities. And in a world where a few people are hoarding obscene wealth, generosity becomes a much more radical act. It says, I see you. I care about you. And I believe there's enough for all of us if we stop playing their game. And finally, we should care about this because if we don't, nothing's going to change. The billionaire class would love nothing more than for us to keep fighting over who's deserving enough. Because the longer we stay distracted by fear and tribalism, the longer they get to hoard, manipulate, and exploit. But if we shift our focus from things to people, from greed to generosity, from division to shared values, if we shift our focus, we can build something better. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone. Let's face it, the wealth that matters most isn't something we own. It's something we create together. And the last question I try to answer is, now what? What are we supposed to do? Where do we go from here? Well, if we want to push back against greed, fear, and division, one of the most effective tools we have is generosity. But generosity isn't just about money or stuff. It really starts with our mindset. It's about seeing others as worthy of care and being willing to give something up to make someone else's life even a little better. That might sound like a sacrifice, but here's the thing. The most meaningful generosity usually leaves us with more than we gave. So this week, we're going to look back instead of looking forward. So with that in mind, here's your multi-part question for the week. I want you to think of a time when you gave something up in order to be generous. And what did you offer? What did it cost you? And what did you gain in return? Emotionally, relationally, or even practically? Now, answering this question, it matters because it helps us reconnect with the power of generosity in a more specific and in a much more personal way. When we remember what we gained from giving, whether it was a stronger friendship, maybe deeper trust, a surprising act of support from someone later on, or even just the satisfaction of showing up for someone else. When we remember what we gained from giving, we start to rewire how we think about what wealth actually means. Now, for me, generosity hasn't always looked like one big, grand, selfless moment. And honestly, when I first thought about this question, I struggled to come up with a single dramatic story. Not because I haven't been generous, but because my generosity has usually played out over time, sort of slow and steady, especially in the context of my work and my volunteer life. I spent years as a youth ministry volunteer, showing up for teens week after week after week, giving my time, energy, creativity, because I enjoyed doing it most of the time, but mainly because it mattered. There wasn't any sort of big payoff at the time, and I didn't expect one. But in the fall of 2011, something surprising happened. My oldest son had just been confirmed, and my best friend, Jim, who was also his sponsor, had come down from Michigan for the ceremony. And the very next day, we attended Mass at a new parish, St. Francis, after deciding to leave our previous one because it was, disturbingly conservative. After Mass, while I was catching up with a teen we knew from Boy Scouts at the other parish, he and his family had also moved to St. Francis, I was catching up with him, and Jim, ever the friendly deacon, introduced himself to the pastor and, completely unprompted, recommended me as a great youth ministry volunteer. Well, it turns out the parish had just parted ways with their youth minister 2 days earlier. So a casual conversation turned into an impromptu reference, and then a quick introduction, a follow-up meeting, and a week later, I had a job offer to become their new part-time director of youth ministry. It worked perfectly alongside my full-time work, let me keep doing what I loved, and on a very practical level, it brought in extra income right when my family really needed it. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. That job helped us stabilize our finances, which eventually played a key role in allowing me to retire early now that things have gotten messy under the Trump regime. All of that happened, not because I was chasing a paycheck, trying to be successful at something, but because I'd spent years showing up for others. I spent years being generous with what I had to give. Now, this isn't about patting yourself on the back. It's about recognizing that when we give of ourselves, we grow. We build real wealth, the kind that can't be hoarded and doesn't lose value. And in a world where we're constantly told to look out for ourselves, reflecting on the times that we looked out for others reminds us of what actually makes life better. So take a few minutes to think it through. Think of a time when you gave something up in order to be generous. What did you offer? What did it cost you? And what did you gain in return? Emotionally, relationally, or even practically. Because the more we understand what generosity has done for us, the more willing we'll be to choose to do it again. Well, before I wrap things up, I'd like to leave you with one more thought. In his book, The Prophet, poet Khalil Gibran wrote, "You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give." Gibran was a poet and philosopher whose writings are just full of timeless insight, and this one is a perfect companion to our question this week. It's easy to think of generosity as just dropping a few bucks in a donation box or writing out a pretty hefty check at the end of the year. And yes, financial giving matters. But what Gibran reminds us of is that the real magic happens when we give of ourselves. Our time, our energy, our presence, our skills, our stories. When we reflect on a moment from our past where we were generous, especially one that maybe cost us something, we're likely to find that what we gained in return was far more valuable than what we gave up. And it's not just about, the karmic balance or feel-good vibes. It's about the way those moments shape us. Those moments, they form our character, they build trust, and they create connections that tend to last. Gibran's words help us see that generosity isn't about what's in your wallet. It's about what's in your heart. And when we give from that place, we're not just helping someone else. We're becoming better, stronger, more grounded versions of ourselves. So as you think about the question this week, keep Gibran's wisdom in mind. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. All right, we've come to the end of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week, but in the meantime, I encourage you to engage with our question for the week and pay attention to any important lessons you come across, wherever you find them. You'll create a more purposeful and joyful life, and you'll start to feel more connected to the world and the people around you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Mythologizing the Bible as we did a deeper dive into the readings for the 18th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle C of the Roman Catholic Lectionary. Remember that a just and thriving society starts with choosing to be generous and choosing to care. The Bible readings used for this episode are from the Holy Bible New International Version, NIV, copyright 1973, 1978, 1984, and 2011 by Biblica Inc., used by permission, all rights reserved, worldwide. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please consider telling a friend about it. The more people who hear the positive messages I'm sharing, the better. Mythologizing the Bible is a live-streamed series held most Thursday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern Time on twitch.tv/thecodaproject. Every week, the audio of these Mythologizing the Bible presentations is released as a podcast. You can find both the podcast and the occasional video versions of the presentations at thecodaproject.com. CODA stands for Creating Our Divine Alignment. When we learn to align our words and actions with our core values, that alignment feels absolutely exquisite it feels divine. But it's a divine alignment that doesn't require belief in the supernatural. It's a divine alignment we have the ability to create for ourselves. To learn more, to subscribe to my mailing list, and to keep up on everything I'm doing with the Coda Project, please visit thecodaproject.com.